Well, let's not waste any more time. In the beginning montage, we up until the very end were picking out what we were going to pick for the montage, but I think I'm just going to go basically simple, basic B a little bit, and just do Staying Alive for the montage. So that's what you would have heard. Sometimes we record the montage post-show, and that's the case for this. So Staying Alive is going to be in there. And you know what? Let's start with Matt, because Matt, probably the last time we covered the Bee Gees was the most positive. We covered Main Course, for those that were wondering. This album, I would say a little over a third of it is Bee Gees material, and then instrumentals and various other groups,
disco tracks
that would be known or less known. So the context of that, thoughts, Matt?
So yeah, this is definitely different than the Main Course album, the Bee Gees album, which had probably the first couple tracks were more disco, and then it was kind of more of a pop oriented type of record. Yes. This is full blown disco from start to finish, pretty much, and I liked it overall. I knew a good portion of the songs, pretty much knew the Bee Gees songs, right? So you've got like Jive Talkin', More Than a Woman, a song I know, Staying Alive, obviously, Night Fever. Some other songs that I knew, like obviously was the last track, Disco Inferno, like Burn, Baby, Burn. Knew that. So didn't know it was 11 minutes long. So
I was about to say the same thing. I had no idea.
I saw that too.
Fullest 11. Yeah.
I was like, I'm not sure that was necessary. And then I knew, was it Boogie Shoes, right? The Casey and the Sunshine Band was so probably a good portion of this record I knew, and overall I liked it. Disco is something that I've never had a great disdain for. I know back in the day it was kind of like rock purists and stuff people hated disco and would burn their records and all that stuff. But there's certainly, to me, there's a place for this type of thing, and it's certainly fun. I definitely could have done without the instrumentals. That to me is where this album went too long. The overall record, it's a double album, which I didn't know. So if you look at the track listing, there's 4 sides that it includes, and it comes in total about an hour and 15 minutes long. So it is a long record. And to me, it would have been much better if you cut out, like, I don't need the Manhattan Skyline or Calypso Breakdown or Night on Disco Mountain. Like, there's just like a slew, like a run of tracks on here that are just, it's instrumentals, and it's fine. It probably fits in well with the movie.
Salsation also, don't forget that one.
Yes, Salsation. And it's very 70s. Like, this album is a very 70s record with the orchestration and the guitar sound. A lot of funk guitar. Disco's got a good amount of funk guitar, but it's in the bass, it's kind of like the finger slapping bass kind of thing that they're doing. So overall I liked it. It's not something that I probably would go to a lot, but I would probably, if I were to go to more of this, I would probably do more of a cut and paste kind of thing, make a playlist of something that's much more digestible. So, I think the Bee Gees certainly, they're front and center here. They have like the first 3 or 4 tracks, and they have a couple more later on in the record, and they're all songs that you're familiar with. And it's easy to understand why this was popular at the time. And it's also easily understood why it might not be as popular today. But I think it's overall, it's a good record. It could just really benefit from as we've said before, an editor, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, you forget, Matt, that there was no editor and no ability to copy and paste music and just listen to whatever you want back then. So.
I know, but now I can do that. I can just make a Matt's Saturday Night Fever playlist,
yes,
the digestible version. So
if you before I give my thoughts, if you allow me, I did pull some stats, John, on this album because I thought it was important.
I should have asked you at the beginning. Yes,
this is the second highest grossing best-selling soundtrack album of all time, with I believe over 16 million copies sold. Yep.
Do we know what the highest selling is of all time?
Oh, we do. Do you guys want any guess of that? It's from the 90s.
Forrest Gump.
Good guess. It's
actually the highest selling soundtrack.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, that's
It is The Bodyguard with 18 million.
Oh, that's right. We should have known that. We've talked about that before.
Everyone loved Whitney and wanted to buy the soundtrack just for that song. So I don't think these records are ever going to be broken, because there is no point to having movie soundtracks or buying movie soundtracks anymore when people could just download or listen to all the songs that they want without having to purchase a CD or LP. I also, doing my due diligence, I also watched Saturday Night Fever for the first time as part of this. And Saturday Night Fever was the third highest grossing movie of 1977. And I think that plays in hand with how well the soundtrack sold. It's watching the movie, it's kind of shocking how popular this movie was, because this would not be a movie that deals the things it deals with and addresses, and some of the things that have aged poorly in the movie would not be. I just can't imagine this being a top 10 movie nowadays. It would be like an indie.
Seem to remember it being similar to, like, if you took that Billy Joel song that started off the album we covered and made a whole movie out of it. Like, that's basically what it was. Am I correct in that, or am I remembering it incorrectly?
You're right. It's very much about John Travolta's character going to a disco with his friends, and kind of the drama and interpersonal life cut in with them dancing at the disco, at the 2001 Odyssey, I believe the club is called. But
didn't he want to, like, be somebody? Isn't that, like, his whole thing? Like, he's
no, not really.
It's been a while. Okay,
yeah, that's part of his character. He doesn't really have a path in life, and the only thing he gets good praise on is his dancing at the club. So that's why he likes going. He really lives for the weekend there. Well,
that's kind of what I meant, like that whole idea, the Studio 54, like, I'm nobody, but then it's Studio 54, I'm somebody. That's
correct.
That's always how I think of, like, disco being explained to me. Yeah.
So the movie made 137 million domestically, which is insane. It made 282 million total box office, including international, which would equate to $1.2 billion in today's money. So I just wanted to put that into context, that is an insanely popular movie, and everybody in 1977 seemingly saw that movie. Do you guys want to guess what the two highest grossing movies of that year were? Any guesses?
One of the Star Wars, I'm guessing, right?
Yes, that is number one. Star Wars Episode 4: New Hope, the first Star Wars movie. And then the second
Jaws?
one. Oh, close. It's another movie directed by Steven Spielberg.
Close Encounters?
Yep, you got it.
E.T.
Okay.
You got it. Yep, Star Wars and Close Encounters were number 1 and 2 that year. So, yeah. And Saturday Night Fever is 3. So, very different compared to those first two fantasy, sci-fi type of movies. So, my thoughts on the album are, I enjoyed it. I thought it was too long, and I think the main appeal for this album, for as much as it sold, was probably all the Bee Gees songs on here. That has to be the draw on this album. There's like 5 Bee Gees songs on here, and they
6.
Okay.
Up to 17. Yeah.
And they're featured prominently in the movie as well. So I think that's another appeal to it. It's clearly, it being a double LP, I think it's also appeal is that you can just put it on and dance to it. Like, you can actually use it at like a club or your party or whatever, and just let it play and people can dance to it. I think that's why there's a 10-minute Disco Inferno version of it, and some of these instrumentals that are also included on it. It's designed clearly to not only mimic the movie, but also get you dancing. And you have what I thought were also 2 very interesting tracks on here. Fifth of Beethoven, which basically uses Beethoven's Fifth to a disco beat. And then Night on Disco Mountain, which is a great title for a song, but it also uses a classical song for its backing, beat. I wonder, is this the first time that we've talked about remixing classical music for terms of pop music? I couldn't remember another time we talked about that, but I think it works here. It works in the context of the disco songs. Boogie Shoes I always think of from the Boogie Nights soundtrack. I think that's on there as well. And
Take It to the House by Master P is what I think of every time I think of that.
Yeah. And also Trick Daddy covers Boogie Shoes, samples that. Chick Loves the Kids. And yeah, I enjoyed the album. the Beatles were the Bee Gees were the strongest components and songs on there. I think Jive Talking is a great deep cut. It's, I think it's on the third LP of this, and they don't put all the Bee Gees songs up front. They kind of spread them out a little bit. And Staying Alive has to be one of the most iconic songs, and it's the opening track to the movie too, with John Travolta walking down the street in Brooklyn. And is that a bass line or a guitar line for Staying Alive, kind of the famous backing track? Do you guys know? I didn't look it up. I was just curious.
It could be both. I
want to say bass, but it could be good. It's a higher part though, right? That could be. My guess is that it's a bass though.
Yeah, it's just such an iconic sound. I think everyone knows that beat, and that's why you wanna walk to it like they do in the movie.
It is a bass groove, Josh, in terms of looking at it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Great. And I think this, we haven't talked about too much disco, and I think this really captures kind of that era of disco and what it represented, and kind of the evolution of pop music too. We talked about ABBA before, and disco is just an offshoot of pop music, in my opinion. It's wholly accessible to everyone. It's designed to be easy listening and it's designed to be danced to, and I feel like that's what pop music was. And I know later on there's a backlash to disco. I haven't researched too much into kind of why that occurred. It seems kind of what's the word? Overly dramatic to the backlash that occurred to disco, but I guess people had enough of it. But I think that disco is alive today and in our pop music, and is carried on through, and the influences there. And I enjoyed the album as a whole. I thought it was kind of characteristic of what disco music is. As I said, there's a lot of horns, there's a lot of bass lines and guitar lines, and then also a lot of electric keyboard throughout. But every song has a good beat, and this album is designed to make you dance, and I think it achieves that.
Oh boy, I have so many thoughts on this. So I was trying to think how many soundtracks we've done. I remember The Harder They Come and then Superfly were the only two that I was able to remember. Unless
I think that's
missing.
Right.
Is that it? So this is our third soundtrack album.
I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure.
I don't know if it's possible to compare this album to those two, because Harder They Come came out of sort of a subgenre that didn't break in the mainstream as much as disco did, and Superfly definitely seemed to be more confined to black culture with some white interloping, whereas disco started as black and gay subculture, right? And then kind of morphed into the mainstream sort of inexplicably.
Yes.
I always consider it when Vogue went from being this thing to, Madonna did it, and then suddenly, square people in the Midwest were voguing, when it really was just sort of the most subculture of subculture things in New York City, right? Particularly amongst the gay and transgender populations, right? And so it's kind of one of these things where it's how does that happen? I was trying to because disco is one of these things that doesn't have a lot of legs in the modern day, I'd say. There's elements, but disco, as much as anything, was of its time. That's what this album, as Matt said, it is a clear product of the late 70s. I think I said before that the Crosby, Stills, and Nash could have only been recorded in this 5-year window because it doesn't fit before or after. It had to be recorded in this time to soundtrack sort of an era, and this certainly is that type of album as well. This had to be recorded between 1976 and 1980. It wouldn't have made any sense at any other time after it, right? It wouldn't have. When you described disco, always just seems to me to be sort of an offshoot of soul and funk that just the groove just keeps going, almost like a jam band kind of. I would describe it in some ways. When I think of disco albums, I think of long interludes of pop hooks over and over again, mixed with long instrumentals, right? And that's kind of what I think of with disco. My take on disco, and I was curious to look at it here, was I always thought there's really nothing that disco gives me that funk and soul doesn't give me better. And disco to me is sort of like a soulless version of funk music, right? Like a sort of a more basic version of it without any of the soul, kind of, and
more disposable.
I mean, I don't want to knock it because it's not negative. It just seems like the type of thing you go listen to this in a club and then you leave. You know, you just don't. I guess you could put disco on and listen to it intellectually, but how? You know, like it's like driving in car or going. I also have always found it because it's clear dance music, and I'm the wrong person with that because I'm not a person that's gonna want to dance, but other musics like funk and soul or pop music or hip hop, like there are plenty of representative tracks that get me tapping my foot or like moving a little bit. Like disco never does for some reason. I don't know what it's like, very sterile to me, kind of. Like I don't know how I felt about this. It was interesting to listen to Main Course by the Bee Gees ahead of this because I almost feel like this was the Bee Gees like vamping up their sound a little bit that they kind of toyed on a little bit in Main Course, but now you've got nothing but falsetto, right? From there you get they're not even doing any of the nuance anymore. Even their ballads sort of have this what I think of as the clear Bee Gees sound. It's interesting to listen to this after Main Course because I can now appreciate when the Bee Gees fans were sharing with us that they didn't think it was a disco album like other later Bee Gees albums. And I can see why they're saying that because there was a lot more variation on Main Course and pop, like different versions of pop. This is just that disco beat that's, I can't even really describe it out. I think I saw it described as a strong, heavy groove, which is a good way to describe it with repetition and pop hooks, right? Like, and that's, you know, the level of repetition on the choruses is similar to like Kraftwerk's repetition in terms of some of their music stuff. I don't know. I think this falls in the category for me if you had to be there a little bit. I think disco is a cultural moment. The Bee Gees songs have always sort of read to me as like the Time Life disco tracks. You know, there were so many of those songs that when I was growing up, like If I Can't Have You is another one. Like I think of it in terms of 10-second snippets from like, and more artists like Yvonne Elliman. And it's like, and then you'll hear like, if I can't have you, I don't want it. And then it would stop and it would go on to another one. Yeah. And then it would like go to Disco Duck and like, you know, hot stuff, and you just get these little different, and to me that's what I'm saying, they all were like just these hooks that were
It's Raining Men
semi-disposable to me, you know, at different times. Disco Inferno, if it's the 4-minute version of it, is a good song, but the 10-minute version of it was all of the sort of things that were a little bit indulgent. To me, if you're gonna play for 10 minutes, you got to have more to say than what that has. So I can't recommend this. I feel it falls in the category of I totally understand if you like it. Disco, you know, we're going to listen to more disco. I'll be curious to see if disco can move me. A lot of my interaction with disco is groups that I like delving into like a disco era, like the Rolling Stones or Blondie or Kiss. And I've always felt that's their worst stuff. So I think I have a little bit of a cognitive bias there as well. I'd be interested to hear a critique of how I'm viewing this by someone who lived through it that was different than that, man, you had to be there and be in the clubs and it was, you know, it was a great time. We danced all the time. Like I want to hear like a artistic argument from me, you know, like of it, because to me, we're a music podcast at our heart, right? And I tried to evaluate this as a piece of music, and it didn't have the legs for me that a lot of.
Well, I don't think it's any. This needs a ton of dissection. I think it's upbeat, catchy, danceable, fun music that was of its time. That still, you know, pokes his head up here and there, and other artists. You know, now music is, it's you know, one song can pick up from like 20 different genres and throw it all together. So you might still hear elements of it here or there. But that's what it was. It was fun. You'd go out to the club and listen to this. And you're right, John. That's kind of like, you know, when you hear this music, you're like, nowadays you're like at a wedding or you're at a club or something like that. You know, it's not, it's usually not something that people are just putting on to listen to as recreationally, maybe as some other genres. It's more of a danceable thing.
I think there's a lot of stuff that's of its era, though, that has more legs for me personally. Like if I hear like 50s doo-wop stuff or early 60s rock and roll or, you know, late 60s, there's all of these different, even like the AOR stuff we covered in the mid 70s or like 80s synth rock. There's a lot of these different things, right? I just don't know if for me personally, anything has so little legs for me in terms of appeal than like the disco sound does. It doesn't have any, it seems of its time, of its time and not really relevant to any other time but of its time in a way that I just can't. It's probably a personal cognitive bias there.
That's my guess. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and argue for the merits of like how, you know, how well crafted the songwriting is. This, to me, disco's a little bit more about maybe the performance and the production rather than the songwriting itself, although there's catchy hooks here, you know, and that's part of the songwriting. And it's, my guess is it's probably more of just like, this is just a genre that sometimes certain genres just don't speak to us, or just kind of like, like if I want this type of feeling, I'm going to go to this other type of music. But yeah,
I'm going to keep working on it though, because I don't like to have a set take, you know, I want to have diversity, because ABBA, you know, which is disco adjacent, I'd say.
Yeah.
Did not. It's of its era too, but it had more legs for me. You know?
Well, John, I did look up while you guys were talking, like why we were talking about the backlash and why there was backlash there, and I just typed in why was there so much backlash with disco, and I got this thing from the Chicago Tribune that says,
is that when they burned the albums at Comiskey?
That has been done, yeah. But this is the backlash against disco was not primarily racist or homophobic. It was fueled by one simple demographic: white men who unfortunately didn't or couldn't dance.
I mean, that rings pretty true to me. You know what I mean?
White men who can't dance. You know, it's like, I don't want to go, and that's me too. I don't want to go to a club and go dancing. Like, that's not, I never really liked that. I guess the planets, the stars would have to align with I need the right people with me, the right amount of alcohol in my body. And, you know, like that would probably make me okay in a club. Other than that.
That seems a little overly, that's like saying the reason people don't like metal is because they don't like loud music, or the reason people don't like punk is because they dress straight. You know, it's kind of, I think the disco, it's like anything. People just sort of jumped on it. I think it also is what disco sort of represented, right? That you turned on. It's kind of like the Backstreet, the Backstreet Boys and stuff have been reimagined as this huge artistic statement in the late 90s. And like, I read more and more stuff like the Spice Girls and the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears were these like real cultural touched, which maybe they were, but they as much represented, you know, what radio had become as much as they represented like a evolution of, it was more of a cultural context, you know, than it was a musical thing. And I feel like disco sort of operates in the same ether, that it was part of pop culture at a time when you also had all kinds of fringe cultures as well. And eventually just people thought, you know, they moved over to the synth rock and like Duran Duran and stuff that was a little bit more palatable for the 80s. You know, they took some of the elements and just recreated it, you know.
Well, to me, like the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears and all those acts, those were teeny bopper thing. I mean, those were you know, bands and artists that were propped up by like 9 to like 13-year-old girls. You know,
and this was like what your secretary and like the people would listen to in the car, you know, or when they went out. You know, if you were like a person who was listening to any sort of albums that sort of were more of an artistic statement, regardless of genre, this was sort of the yin to the yang, wasn't it? Because this is sort of like bubblegum. It's just, it's the same idea, you know. It's not that it's bad, it's what it represents. It's, you know, you're not going to sit and wonder, you know, what More Than a Woman is trying to tell you, other than, you know, it's about going out and a love song nominally, right? About...
I mean, I think this is just where the pop charts were at this point. Because if you look at like the Billboard charts for singles, a lot of them at this time are disco. songs. And I think ultimately that's why we're listening to this album, is to capture that era and to get a feeling as to what disco was like. I mean, we don't cover too much disco overall, but I think this is a good representation of it.
That's a great question, because I just pulled up the top 100 songs of the year 1977. Are you ready to hear how many do you want to hear, guys? Because some of these are
10.
Probably the top 10 are like 6 are Bee Gees songs.
So there, no, actually, believe it or not, none are Bee Gees songs.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of crazy. I wonder if like the Bee Gees songs hit the charts later. But
78.
This is as of Wikipedia. This is based on
between
December 24th, 1977, and
Saturday Night Fever came out in December of 77. So
so they're going to be hitting 78.
So let's look at 78 then, because that'll be more reflective, right? So let's use 78 then as the thing. Okay, so here's the top 10. Okay, and yes, the Bee Gees are all over this. Like, number 10 is "Three Times a Lady" by the Commodores, which I think is probably most well known to one generation as the song that Eddie Murphy sings as Buckwheat. Like, Taz. So that's there. But that I would call, that's more R&B, than it is disco, I'd say, that one. And then we've got "Boogie Oogie Oogie" by A Taste of Honey, which is definitely disco. And then we've got "Love is Thicker Than Water" by Andy Gibb, who is a Bee Gee by proxy, right? He's the he's the other brother, right, who's not in the Bee Gees.
Yes,
because it's right. So, and then there's "Baby Come Back" by Player.
Baby Come Back.
Oh, okay. I don't know that one.
What would we?
I think you'd know if you heard it.
Baby Come Back.
Is it disco? Would you say?
I think it's soul.
It's like a ballad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and then 6 is "How Deep Is Your Love" by the Bee Gees, which is on this album, so definitely disco. Number 5 is "Kiss You All Over" by the band Exile, which is nominally a rock band, but I think
till the night closes in.
The dance infused. 4 is "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees. 3 is "You Light Up My Life" by Debbie Boone, which is of its own genre of like Christian rock mixed with like Carpenters-esque like pop music, I'd say. And then 2 is "Night Fever" by the Bee Gees, and 1 is "Shadow Dancing" by Andy Gibb. And just so that you know where we're at in popular music, number 11 is "Grease" by Frankie Valli, and number 12 is "You're the One That I Want" by John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. So there's quite a bit of disco and like a hard pop. So it isn't really till we get to I'm looking to see the first song, "Lay Down Sally" by Eric Clapton is at 15. So that would probably be the first thing outside of those two genres. So you're right. It is very reflective of the times. There's also songs like "We Will Rock You" by Queen in this era. So there's a lot of big pop. We're going to talk Meatloaf. He's here too, but he certainly will fall into that category as well. So
and we never did the numbers at the top of the thing here, so I just want to say that this was in Best Ever Albums. It came in at number 286 in the 1970s, number 31 in 77, and 1375 of all time. In Rolling Stone's list, it's 163 of all time. So
and if you're going cultural cachet, it makes sense. It's the disco album. So
Yep. John, to answer your question, I think the only other thing that's kind of a compilation album that we've covered is Nuggets, original artifacts from the psychedelic artist.
Well, keep in mind, you were talking soundtracks too, and technically, I think 3 Beatles albums are considered soundtrack albums as well for their movies.
True.
So, a little different, but
sure, not like Superfly though.
Okay. Well, there we go. That's our take on Saturday Night Fever. Seems to be 2 moderate recommends, and then not so much from my end of things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was dancing around my dog. She was confused last night, so I think it's successful on that level.
Yeah, it's catchy. It's fun. It has its place for sure.
I listened to this album on a 50-minute drive I was on a couple days ago, and it's interesting driving music. So
you still had a half hour to go.
Yes, I did.